Welcome, bienvenue, welcome once again to another Cladding Matters, the weekly magazine show featuring Steve Day and Hamish McClay, and usually a special guest. And today's special guest is no exception, friend of the show, Wendy Gibson of the First Time Buyers Club, someone who's right at the end of the sharp point of the stick, so she knows exactly what's going on when people are trying to get into those first homes. Hamish McClay has helped me set this thing up in the first place, of Search Convey, and Steve Day, who is at the moment waging a war, battle, an attack to try and set these things up, not just to relieve him of the pressure of being locked into Royal Artillery Quays, a place where the cladding, even once it's removed, they will leave large gobbets of what can largely be described as firelighters stuck to the side. But also for ongoing, for the future, so that people don't get into this position again. And part of that is today's topic. Today's topic is about the fact that fire chiefs agree that the PAS 9980 standard just isn't working. Hamish, would you start us off?
Right, it's pretty well an update of sort of how things are at the moment as we sort of move along, but it also reflects the kind of work which is going on. Steve himself is very much involved with in both the houses of Parliament, the Lords and the Commons, and the discussion groups that are sort of taking place and working parties there. And they've come up with some very, very important conclusions relative to what is actually happening. And what we must remember is one of the major contributors to the situation that we find, or we have two major contributors, both local government and full government itself. They have accepted as being perfectly adequate the PAS 9980 as being a perfectly adequate standard to actually have people living within, as well as unfortunately as far as Steve is concerned, Royal Artillery Quays, the whole of the council, by virtue of the numbers, it's basically the Labour members. I perhaps shouldn't mention that, but we will, because it is Labour-controlled local council which have agreed that as far as they are concerned, there isn't sufficient risk at Royal Artillery Quays for them to worry about. And they put the total, if you like, the total risk that there is onto the shoulders of those who actually live within that property without speaking to them. Now, that's not the only council that does it, but the government itself is, as we know, they've accepted a very, very weak standard, which is really not acceptable to either insurers or mortgage providers. So until that happens, they're putting a tremendous amount of pressure on what could end up being a financial disaster, not just for the owners of these properties, but for some of the banks that have lent them some money. But let's have some updates sort of as we sort of delve into this and see what Steve can tell us as if progress is being made, and Wendy indeed, if in fact things are being noticed within the depth of what's actually when people are trying to find properties that they want to live in, bearing in mind we do still have this desperate shortage of properties throughout the United Kingdom, actually.
Steve, welcome to the show. I'm going to be a bit mischievous here, so forgive me. I'm going to play devil's advocate. Surely some standard is better than no standard at all. I mean, PAS 9980 might not be perfect, but the trouble is, if you apply too harder standards, then nobody wants to build at all because it's too onerous a task.
Well, my question for you then is, why is the standard for remediation in law, which is a lot stricter, and then they've decided to water down the law that they put in under the Building Safety Act and undermine it with a dodgy contract? You know, if they were so certain of that point, then why create a higher standard for law?
Well, I suspect it's to speed things along. You know, an easier passed standard means that more people will get on with the job. Yes.
Well, the point, I guess, is does the outcome end in remediation, and what does that mean? And I think this is where the insurers have stepped in. So what the government have done over the last 30 years, just to update listeners and remind them, they've they put a gun to the head of every chief exec of every developer and said, unless you fix all your blocks of flats above 11 meters, then you're not going to enjoy any building control sign off for anything else. So that's developments in progress, as well as developments that might be started in the future. So they decided to sign this contract, all 52, and then they watered down the standard. And this is basically okay if you can get away with it. It's not really okay, but if you're going to do a political fudge, you have to make sure the stakeholders in the room are going to accept the so-called standard. And that's unfortunately what's unraveling. And I always thought it would. But, you know, I've been on with the insurers behind closed doors trying to, you know, talk to them about, you know, obviously the old scheme and so on. But they've been quite reluctant, I guess, to go public. Well, the Association of British Insurers in October of this year basically attacks PAS. And they say this: insurers price based on risk to the building. And whilst PAS 9980 seeks to improve the safety of the building and enable safe evacuation, which I question, a risk of significant fire spread and damage to the building remains if remediation is not undertaken to a property protection standard, which PAS doesn't do, and would continue to be reflected, and this is the killer, in risk-based pricing, which means they're going to jack up your insurance permanently. And they also state that the ABI, the Association of British Insurers, have suggested that UK government should include an annex to PAS 9980, which outlines insurers' property protection considerations in assessing risk. And this would basically go a long way to bringing down premiums after the remediation is done. So therefore, they're condemning PAS as the standard. They're saying you can enjoy your high insurance in blocks of flats, and that is unacceptable. So that's one body. So that's a stakeholder we can work with our work with the Earl of Lytton, which of course our work is basically replacing PAS 9980 with the relevant defect standard under the Building Safety Act 22, which basically would make all the combustible material that's banned on new buildings, new blocks of flats, then take them off and satisfy the insurers. And this isn't a new standard I'm trying to bring in. This is just saying, well, this is what you put in law in 22. Let's follow it, please, for all remediations, instead of the lucky people that have got £500,000. That's how much it costs us to go to court. I found that out this week as well, to get them to do it properly. So it's out of the question for most people, including us here at RAC, to use the court remedies. So we're priced out of the full standard. And our amendments in the House of Lords will say, well, replace PAS 9980 with the full standard, and you don't need to go to court because it will be the default that you get instead of the alternative. And the fire chiefs have also doubled down because they also are starting to speak out about what's going on.
But was it? I mean, I've taken my mischievous hat off now. Just in all honesty, back in the day when you first approached the fire chiefs, they didn't want to know, right?
Well, the assistant commissioner of the fire brigade, you know, fought very hard so that I didn't get the enforcement notices for Royal Artillery keys.
Right. So are you saying that the stance overall has changed at their end?
Well, I think the National Fire Chiefs are a separate body. I mean, I don't know how they relate to the London Fire Brigade, but I guess they all part of the same sort of umbrella.
You'd have thought so. You'd have thought so.
But they say this. So they're condemning the government scheme. So they go, funding is fragmented and inconsistent. Current schemes offer cover only for cladding, which NFCC, the fire chief, says is leaving other serious defects unaddressed.
Yes, exactly. Well, yeah.
With multiple funding streams and varying eligibility by tenure, height, and materials, many buildings are now beginning to remain in limbo. So they're starting to observe, because the funding's not in place, they're just being left. And so you've got this terrible situation of PAS, the partial remediation standard, condemning people to safety issues and permanently high insurance, and you've got multiple funding exclusions, which leaves buildings that can be made up of different types of funding because it's at the individual level. So you might find your neighbour's not covered and you are, and if your neighbour can't afford it, then you're stuffed too because it's in limbo. And you're seeing all of this play out. And of course, we solve the other problem with the funding too by funding everyone without exclusion in blocks of flats of all heights with defects to the full standard without exclusion.
Wow. Well, look, it beggars belief, this. Wendy, it just appears to me that people are dithering yet again and not following through on original promises. I mean, we've got so many potential flats out there that would be available if only this remediation could be undertaken sensibly and equitably.
I could not agree more. I feel so sorry for the likes of Steve and his neighbours who perhaps want to move home and are unable to because they can't sell their flats because of the impending cost that is hovering over their heads in terms of the remediation costs that they might have to fork out for themselves because not everybody is protected.
Right.
And not only that, it also then means that a lot of these flats can't even be rented out. So where are these people supposed to go? It's a huge tragedy, I think, not only because it really does put a bit of a blockage within the home buying industry, but you're also talking about people's personal wealth, their savings, their assets that they were hoping would accumulate over time as property. We're all told property increases over the long term, and all of these people who are sitting in flats where they are unable to sell them because of the cladding issues, because of other uncovered safety issues, they are well and truly in limbo.
Yes.
Okay. There's just, I don't know, I find this whole thing slightly disturbing. Hamish, surely there should be a way in which people at the top of this should be seeing that there's no more denying, no more obfuscating, no more nothing was said, nothing was seen. We need to get on with it and make this right.
Well, the challenge we face is that there are people obfuscating purposely because they don't want to get embroiled with it. There was one major company, I can't remember which one it was, this particular last week or so, that has admitted that because of the remediation costs, they've made no profits whatsoever this year. And they would expect to be making hundreds of millions of pounds worth of profit. I can't remember the name of them. Can you, Steve?
No, I can't. Yeah.
I don't want to mention it just in case I have got it wrong. But all of the companies themselves are going to actually, if they don't get themselves organised and don't look at this in a proper way, which in fact the Earl of Lytton's sort of scheme and the people that have been involved with looking into this have actually come up with figures and ways of solving the situation. And unfortunately, because people are not interested because of the seriousness of the situation, they don't want to take any of it on board. Basically, what they're doing fundamentally is leaving people in that unsafe sort of situation. And as we've sort of known, the people moving out who are renting properties in these types of buildings, because they have found out about the reasoning as well, that it's unsafe there. They don't want to be living in there with their families. So they're moving out. And what the challenge is getting somebody else to move in. If the people are moving out, what's it like for the people who are actually sort of moving into those particular sort of properties? And when we've got a situation where everybody who's important, and the fire chief one would expect, there's also the construction engineers who are actually fully believe that in the state of these standards. But what many of the construction engineers are saying, hey, look, it's not just the cladding, it's the interior of these buildings as well. All of that needs to be resolved. So we've got so many people trying to escape. The experts know that these buildings are being maintained in an unsafe condition. And until something actually is carried, this is the challenge. People need to work together and this is really what Steve's trying to achieve with what's going through the various sort of different sort of members of parliament, to try and bring up, if you like, solutions. This is what we want. We want solutions. We don't want to be sat waiting for somebody to make a decision as to whether you're allowed to be safe in your house or not.
And also, I think it is a bit short-sighted as well, because one of these PAS buildings could go up in flames, and we could have another Grenfell type scenario. I mean, our situation is our fire shafts are 16 stories. They are the only escape in the event of a fire, and they're packed full of the second most combustible material in Europe, packed right up, like, you know, just like firelighters going right up, so the glass would explode. I had a glass engineer look at it, and because it's so combustible, the glass would all it's not fire rated at all, so it's toughened glass without a fire rating, and it would all just have jagged glass exploding with the and the combustible material. It would just conduct up and down the building extremely fast, like you saw in Grenfell, a few minutes to go up a facade. And that is being left on our building because the powers that be believe that that is acceptable under PAS, yet it's banned on new buildings. So I'd say if it's so safe under, you know, existing buildings, why is it banned on new? And I don't get any answers on that. But I do think it's short-sighted, because I think we are making a problem for ourselves that could potentially blow up in the future, literally potentially. And, you know, then we'll be back at square one, where we'll be looking at remediations again. And I think what's happened is they want to limit the liability to the construction industry after the horrors of Grenfell. And this is all a very clever way, in a sense, of taking the political pressure off the governments at the time and now, and say, well, we've done our bit. It's not the perfect solution, but it will get most of it done. And then to shut people like me up that are exposing what's really going on. But then you get a few outliers, like £432 million worth of internal wall defects at the Olympic Village, a development over the river from me. And you would say, well, actually, how many of them are there? And who's going to be able to afford that kind of bill if it's not covered? And the point is that this problem isn't going away. It's just no one really wants to acknowledge it. And what we're going to be doing is organising a conference next year, and we're going to invite all the banks, the insurers. We've already got the ABI that are basically making the right noises, so I'm going to be writing to them over the weekend. And we're going to create a lobbying group that is louder than the builders, that do not want, you know, the entire tenure of leasehold to fail, because they have a vested interest in it not failing. Yes, it's financial instead of moral, but nevertheless, money talks, and we want people to talk the right way. And if that's what we need to do, that's what we need to do. And we're going to encourage all those that maybe do want to do it for the right reasons, plus those that want to ensure that they keep their interests aligned with, you know, doing the right thing by their fiduciary duties. And we create a big group, and we take on the builders, and the Treasury will ultimately implement the loudest lobbying voice that they feel mitigates the risk of not doing that particular lobby group's wishes. And I think that's the only way to play it now. We've tried. I was thinking how many times we've actually done amendments. So we did the fire safety bill, the building safety bill, the leasehold and freehold reform bill, the levelling up bill, and now the planning and infrastructure bill. We've done 5 bills in Parliament every single time, and we'll be doing the remediation bill shortly. So I would have done 6 bills of amendments. And it's an indictment of our country that all we've actually really done is push the same message. Consumers need to be protected, all of them, from defects, and the defects need to be remediated to a standard which allows it to be sellable and insurable as well as safe, and that's questionable. And that's all we've done. And this is 5 years. And we still are having the same arguments. So we have to look at what happens outside of Parliament. And that's where our focus lies now. We need to convince people of the liability that's coming their way. And the banks will be sitting on this through the loss of mortgage payments. Now, if people don't pay their mortgages, they're going to get this liability. And also, if people don't pay their service charge, the bank loses 100% of the flat through forfeiture. You know, that's something, if you're going to be selling those mortgages overseas in a mortgage-backed security, you're not going to be telling your mortgage buyers, are you? And this is another problem. And we're looking at the securitization impact of this, because I don't know if you guys and the listeners are aware of the 2008 crisis, but I worked for Lehman Brothers and I was involved.
Oh, my goodness. You worked for Lehman Brothers. I had no idea.
Watch out. So I tell the government I work for Lehman, and you know what happened there? Maybe you should listen this time. And,
exactly.
You know, and basically they sold mortgages that they knew couldn't really sort of be paid back.
The subprimes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they packaged those, and then they sold those mortgages knowing that they would go bad. But it doesn't matter if the house prices always go up. Highly immoral, but
completely immoral, and gambling. And gambling was the worst kind.
Gareth, this is what's happening now. Well, as what has happened over the last 30 years. They've sold those mortgages in securitization, saying there's no liability. Well, that's not true after the Building Safety Act. They should have updated those bond prospectuses. The likes of Moody's, Standard & Poor's, all of these rating agencies had a fiduciary duty to warn people of the risk of buying mortgage-backed securities littered with UK residential flat mortgages full of unknown liabilities that are not covered by our government. And I think there'll be some American investors out there. They'll be pretty angry that the UK government has pushed the liability from the construction industry onto them. And those are the people we'll be inviting to our conference.
Right. Well, Hamish. Oh, actually, before Hamish, Wendy, I'd like a final comment for you before I toss the caber, as it were, to Hamish. This must be so frustrating for someone whose sole purpose is to try and help people get on the housing ladder. It must feel like that ladder is gradually disappearing further and further away into the distance.
It is, because, you know, yes, these flats which are up for sale might look very cheap because they are being sold at a loss because of the cladding issues. But the sting in the tail is exactly as what Steve said. It's the cost of insurance, which gets reflected within service charges. So whilst a lot of first-time buyers might be able to afford the mortgage payments on these flats, it's the running costs afterwards which truly make them stuck. And we're actually starting to see more and more stories in the press about people actually being pushed into bankruptcy because of the ongoing costs.
Right.
There was actually
it's just ridiculous. I know of at least 2 examples of that.
There was an article of that in the BBC only this week of somebody who ended up having to go into bankruptcy because of crippling service charges around the cost of running and owning their flat. So, you know, this is always something I'm having to warn first-time buyers about. Don't think just because a flat is cheap that you're getting a bargain. There's obviously a reason for it, and quite often it's to do with the really high service charges.
Hamish, after a tumultuous discussion, would you take us home, please?
Well, it sort of brings in one of the discussions we had earlier this week in our Property Matters podcast, when we had Zara there explaining the challenges relating to service contracts and the management costs, not just of flats, incidentally. We're now speaking about these kinds of charges slipping onto housing estates and the rest of it, and the dangers of that. So people do need to be very, very careful, not to say that it's preventing some things from happening, but it is a serious issue. If it's unsafe, would you want to be? And I mean, I know Wendy suggested earlier that we've got a situation now that people might rent a flat rather than actually buy one, but if the number of flats available to rent are reducing, and you know you're going to be renting one which has a risk attached to it, would you really want to be participating in that? So it is not in any way at all going to help the type of issue that we've got with the serious shortage of housing that we've got in this country.
Well, look, I can't thank you all for making this abundantly clear to myself. I am a bear of little brain, and having it laid out for me makes it very clear. But also, to all of you out there, I'm sure, who actually feel like, well, these people making such a fuss over nothing. Actually, it's not. And it's not just about what's happening now, poor Steve and so on. It's more about what's coming next down the tubes. How can we stop other people landing themselves into terrible bother? But if we don't make sure these building standards are up to snuff, and they really aren't. Thank you once again, Steve Day, for your sage knowledge and of course, great words of wisdom. Wendy Gibson, always there for the first time buyer. Thank you very much. And Hamish McClay of Search Convey, who keeps saying his knowledge isn't up to snuff, but he knows more than the rest of us. Don't tell anyone. But between all of us, I hope we bring you entertainment and also information about what's really going on. Until next week, please keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. Who knows? We might get through this. And look after that mental health. Bye-bye now.
There's a tale about some folks with hammers and some nails. They'll polish through the moon